If the Reverend Horace Vale had died at any other hour, say at 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon, no one would have thought it remarkable. He was, after all, a man whose constitution had been steadily eroding beneath the twin assaults of gout and parish politics for nearly 2 decades. But when his neatly lifeless body was found seated stiffly at the head of the dining table at Blagden Hall, cravat unmarred, napkin folded precisely in his lap, and a single glass of unopened champagne glinting at his elbow, and the bottle still perfectly chilled, even the most conservative guests agreed that something surely was a bit odd. Blagden Hall, a frost-bitten jewel on the edge of Dorset's less fashionable coastal fringe, had long been the sort of place where peculiar things occurred without proper inquiry. It was the sort of estate where footmen still wore livery with bad grace, and the wallpaper was older than the current generation of occupants. The owner, Sir Mervyn Triffle, pronounced Truffle, though he always corrected people after they had mispronounced it, had invited a select group of house guests for a modest fête. Modest in this case, meaning a 12-course supper and a Viennese string quartet imported for the weekend. Lord Peter Wimsey had not been invited. He had, rather, arrived by accident. A detour due to a failed radiator, a missing milepost, and an aggressively stupid sheep that refused to yield the road. He had pulled up outside Blagden Hall in a borrowed Lagonda, commented cheerfully on the deplorable state of the hedge-line, and, after being mistaken for one of the scheduled entertainers, a cellist suffering from flatulence and nerves, had been shown into the drawing-room with no further fuss. "There are worse ways to gain admission to the country," Wimsey remarked, stretching his legs across a fainting couch while delicately avoiding a porcelain spaniel. It was Lady Honoria Trefoil, née St. Everleigh, who discovered the body. She had entered the dining-room promptly at 7:15, prepared to scold her husband for delaying the soup course, and instead found the Reverend Vale seated in utter stillness, his expression one of mild, apologetic confusion, as though he had been offered the wrong sermon. "He looked," she said later to the constable, "as if someone had just told him the piano tuner was Lutheran." Constable Merritt, young, deeply rural, and slightly awed by Damask, had telephoned the doctor and then the coroner, and after some debate had rather hesitantly rung the police in Dorchester. "But I rang you," said Sir Mervyn irritably, jabbing a finger toward Wimsey. "You said you were in the neighborhood." "I did," said Wimsey affably, turning over a salt cellar. "Though I must admit I hadn't quite anticipated dying clergy with my consommé." The local GP, Dr. Solby, had declared the cause of death likely heart failure. There were no signs of struggle. The dining chair was upright. The table was laid with militaristic precision. The servants had heard nothing, seen nothing, suspected nothing, which they proclaimed with the exaggerated sincerity of those who had very likely heard and seen quite a lot. "And the champagne?" Wimsey asked, eyes narrowed. "I'm told it was opened but not poured." "Indeed," sniffed Lady Honoria. "It was the bottle we reserve for very special occasions. It was chilled quite perfectly." "Yet," murmured Wimsey, flicking the rim of the untouched glass with one languid finger, "Reverend Vale didn't drink." Lady Honoria blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "He didn't drink," repeated Wimsey. "Not alcohol. An old temperance man, I believe. Wrote pamphlets on the evils of port and pudding wine, and yet he allowed a bottle of Paul Roger to be opened in his honor. Curious. Perhaps he made an exception," offered Sir Mervyn stiffly, "for celebration." Said Wimsey, but the celebration had not yet occurred. Silence settled. Somewhere in the distance, the dull thunder of sea against cliff provided an oddly funereal rhythm. Wimsey stood, brushing an invisible fleck from his cuff. "If you will allow me," he said lightly, "I think I'll take a turn about the premises. One can learn an awful lot from the way a house stands, you know. Where the windows are, how the wind moves, whether servants gossip with the candlesticks or the clocks. All terribly enlightening." Constable Merritt opened his mouth. perhaps to protest, or to offer an escort, but Lord Peter was already gone, his footsteps oddly quiet for a man so very tall and so very inquisitive. Behind him, the champagne remained chilled, the glass remained full, and Reverend Vale remained, unmistakably, dead. Wimsey moved through the hallways of Blagden with the air of a man searching for mislaid gloves rather than motive or murderer. His fingers trailed lightly across banisters polished to a dull gleam by decades of dutiful servants, his gaze flicking from oil portrait to sconce, not missing the frayed edge of a carpet runner or the faint mark where a console table had clearly once stood and been removed. He passed through the breakfast room, presently underused, and into the smaller parlor, where the window stood slightly ajar, letting in the damp breath of early spring. On a tray near the settee rested 2 teacups, one with a smear of lipstick, the other clean but half full. Wimsey tilted his head, sniffed the dregs, and gave a soft before continuing. In the dining room, Dr. Solby was repacking his bag with the meticulous irritation of a man unappreciated. The body had been removed, but the place settings remained. A still life of a meal never eaten. Wimsey's eyes lingered on the empty place to the right of the Reverend's chair. A knife slightly askew, a faint imprint on the velvet where someone had perhaps risen too hastily. "You'll find no mystery in the heart, Lord Wimsey," Solby muttered as Wimsey re-entered. "It simply stops in the end." "Quite," said Wimsey amiably, "though I do wonder why it chose to stop precisely as the soup was being ladled. Coincidence. And yet how theatrical," Wimsey mused, hands in pockets, as if the curtain rose on Act 1, only to fall without dialogue. Solby gave him a look he reserved for women who insisted on homeopathy and men who quoted Browning before breakfast. "I dare say you have seen the man's records," Wimsey continued gently. "Nothing to suggest immediate danger." "He had ailments," Solby replied, "but nothing fatal, and nothing that explained the peculiar stillness of the limbs. No rictus, no slump. He sat as if waiting for grace to be said, which, oddly, was his job." Wimsey's smile flickered and faded. He wandered back into the hall where a maid was polishing a brass doorknob with vigorous anxiety. "Miss," he prompted, voice as soft as tweed. "Florrie, sir," she said, straightening. "Florence Bindle, I do the downstairs and silver." "And Reverend Vale?" he asked, as if discussing an unwelcome guest who had tracked in mud. She hesitated. "Quiet, mostly. Always came on Thursdays to see Lady Honoria. Talked about the Mothers' Guild and the Stained Glass Fund. Didn't like dogs." "Who does?" said Wimsey brightly. "Did you serve at table tonight?" "No, sir. That's Niven and Polly." "But you saw the table laid?" "Yes, sir. I brought in the last of the glassware just before the bell." "And who placed the champagne at the Reverend's side?" Florrie blinked. I think it were Niven. He does the wines, sir." "Excellent." Wimsey smiled, inclined his head, and padded off down the corridor to the butler's pantry, where he found Niven polishing decanters with the air of a man insulted by both the current century and the quality of the hired help. "Pardon the intrusion, Niven," Wimsey said. "I wonder if I might ask you a sacrilegious question about the sacraments, namely, who decided the good Reverend would be toasted in champagne tonight?" Niven, who had the skeletal dignity of an undertaker but the eyes of a scandalized schoolmaster, gave a tight nod. "Sir Mervyn's instruction, my lord. To mark the end of the fund drive for the village tower. The Reverend had met his goal." "And did the Reverend appear pleased by this effervescence?" Niven paused. "Well, my lord, he looked surprised. I brought the bottle in just as the guests were sitting. The Reverend barely glanced at it. I thought he might object, but he only nodded, stiffly, mined, and said nothing." "Did he touch the glass?" "Not while I was there." "Curious," murmured Wimsey. "A man toasts his own success with a drink he morally opposes, and does not drink it, and then dies." He turned as Polly, the second parlour maid, entered, clutching a folded cloth. She stopped short at the sight of him. "Oh, sorry, sir. No need. Come in. Just a query, if you don't mind. When you set the Reverend's place, did you notice anything odd?" Polly bit her lip. "Only that the plate was warm, sir. Too warm. The others weren't, not yet. I thought cook must have brought it up early." "And did you tell anyone?" "No, sir. It seemed nothing." "Indeed," said Whimsy. "Warm plate, cold drink, still corpse, a study in thermal contrast." He left them both blinking and walked once more through the dining room, pausing beside the place setting that had been meant for the late clergyman. He placed his hand lightly on the chair back. The fabric still held the trace of warmth. And yet, Whimsy bent, inspecting beneath the table. His fingers brushed something small, hard and circular. A communion wafer? No, he retrieved it. A tablet. Pale, unmarked. From his pocket, he drew a monogrammed handkerchief and folded the object within. Then he straightened, smoothing his coat, and said to no one in particular, "I do believe the Reverend's last supper was not taken in good faith." And with that, he went in search of Sir Mervyn Trifle, who, as it turned out, had rather a lot to say about the Tower Fund, and considerably less about what had been done to secure it. Whimsy found Sir Mervyn Trifle in his study, a small, wood-panelled chamber that smelt faintly of saddle soap and tax returns. The baronet stood behind an antique desk littered with correspondence and a disobediently open decanter of sherry. At the knock, he looked up sharply and adjusted his waistcoat, a flush of irritation already climbing his cheeks. "If you've come to take fingerprints off the letter opener," he said with brittle levity, "you'll find I've touched everything in here twice already. Habit of proprietorship." "Don't tempt me, Sir Mervyn," said Whimsy mildly, "though I'm more interested in a few questions of temperament than temperature. Specifically, the Reverend Vales and the houses." The baronet grunted. "I can't imagine you'll learn much of use. Horace Vale was the sort of man who disapproved of weather if it blew from the wrong quarter. Fussy, particular. Bit of a bore, if I may say so, but he did his duty." "Ah, yes, that ever-fickle altar of duty," murmured Whimsy, inspecting a brass inkstand with idle curiosity. "And it was his duty, I take it, that brought him here tonight? This Tower Fund business?" Yes, said Sir Mervyn, waving a hand. "We've been fundraising for months. Dreadful nuisance. He finally met the goal with some last-minute donation, anonymous, mind you, which delighted him no end. Lady Honoria wanted to mark the occasion with something celebratory. Champagne was the obvious gesture." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Even knowing his aversion?" Sir Mervyn paused. "He was a churchman, Lord Whimsy, not a nonconformist. I suspect he was more flexible than his pamphlets implied. Anyway, it was symbolic. No one expected him to drink it. Yet it was placed beside him, the bottle opened, the glass clean and untouched, rather an elaborate symbol. And yet," Whimsy added, stepping closer, "one curious detail sticks in my mind. The Reverend arrived just before dinner. Was he alone?" Sir Mervyn frowned. "I believe so. I didn't see him until we all gathered in the drawing-room, but I assumed he'd come straight from the vicarage." "Did he leave his coat or hat in the cloakroom?" "I've no idea. You'd better ask Cray, the hall porter, if he's not asleep in the broom cupboard." Whimsy inclined his head. "And the anonymous donor, do you know who it was?" "Not a clue," said Sir Mervyn too quickly. "These things often happen. Someone in the village, no doubt. Vale was well liked by the more pious element." "Curious," said Whimsy. "When anonymous donors enter the picture, one always wonders if the motive is piety or privacy." Sir Mervyn made a noise that was meant to be a laugh and poured himself another measure of sherry. Whimsy took his leave. In the hallway, he encountered Cray, a beetle-browed man who gave the impression of having been pressed into shape by years of boot polish and staircases. Whimsy detained him with the gentlest of interruptions. "Cray, Did you see the Reverend Vale arrive this evening? I did, my lord. 7:15, on the dot. Alone? Yes, my lord. Came in a cab from the station. Odd that. Usually walks the mile up if it's not raining. Left anything? Just his coat and hat, sir. Black wool, not the best cut. Did he say anything? Not much, sir. Asked whether Lady Honoria was in. I told him they were dressing for dinner. He nodded. Went straight to the drawing room. Thank you, Cray. Tell me, do you know who made the donation that completed the Tower Fund? Cray hesitated. Can't say, sir. But I did see Lady Honoria opening a letter earlier this week. Looked rather pleased. Came in a thick cream envelope, bit of a seal on it like the ones from solicitors. Whimsy's eyes sharpened. Was this before or after the Reverend's visit last Thursday? Before, sir. Tuesday, I think. Why? No reason. Just a passing curiosity about saints and benefactors. He returned to the drawing room, where Lady Honoria had retired with two of the guests, Miss Sylvain Pike, a novelist with severe bangs and a taste for velvet, and Colonel Arbuthnot, who looked rather like a walrus in mourning. They were sipping post-prandial Madeira and trying not to glance at the empty chair where the Reverend should have been holding forth on poor masonry and richer faith. Forgive me, said Whimsy, bowing with dry grace, but I wonder if I might have a word with our hostess. Lady Honoria rose, lips tight. She followed, Whimsy, into the morning room, which was dimly lit and still scented faintly of gardenia. I expect you have more questions, Lord Whimsy. I'm afraid I do, he said, settling himself in an armchair. Tell me, did the Reverend know the identity of the person who made the final donation to the fund? She hesitated, a flicker crossing her expression. Not officially, but I believe he suspected. He seemed quite touched. Spoke of divine provision. A phrase that often masks human design, said Whimsy. Do you know who it was? She looked down at her hands. I shouldn't say, but yes. It was my cousin, Benedict Stroud. Not a name I've heard this weekend. No, he's abroad. India, I believe. But he wired a gift from his solicitors. Some legacy payment that had matured. He and Horace were schoolmates once. Ah, said Whimsy, steepling his fingers. And was the Reverend glad to see the fund completed? Of course. Why wouldn't he be? No reason. Except, perhaps, that a man who had spent months building a public appeal might resent having it ended by a single, faceless benefactor, undermining the whole purpose of his campaign. Lady Honoria's face darkened. That's not fair. Horace cared about the work, not the credit. Did he? Whimsy murmured. And yet I wonder, did he quarrel with anyone tonight? No, she said flatly. Not even you. She blinked. What do you mean? Only that your glass, before dinner, showed a smear of lipstick. You'd had tea, with someone else. And your husband doesn't drink tea in the afternoon, I gather. She exhaled slowly. Yes. Horace and I had tea together. We always did before these dinners. It was a sort of ritual. What did you discuss? He asked me to withdraw the champagne. And did you? No, she said with a kind of defiant sadness. I refused. I said the occasion deserved a toast. He was silent for a while. Then he said something strange. Which was, some victories come at a cost. I only hope the price isn't collected tonight. I didn't know what he meant. I thought perhaps he was being dramatic. Perhaps, said Whimsy softly. Or perhaps he already suspected something was wrong. There was silence. Lady Honoria, he said, rising, would you mind if I saw the letter? The one from your cousin's solicitor? Yes, I think I still have it. It's in my writing desk. Would you be so good? She left the room, returning moments later with an envelope. Whimsy opened it, extracted the letter, and examined the handwriting, the seal, the scent. He frowned. Curious, he said. This was posted in London, no overseas mark. Is that odd? Possibly not. unless your cousin is, as you say, in India." Lady Honoria stared at the letter, then looked up, suddenly pale. "You don't think—" "I don't know yet," Whimsy said, folding the letter back. "But I do know the Reverend feared something. He drank no champagne, and yet he died suddenly, silently, with a peculiar calm, as if something had already been decided." He turned to go. "Oh, and Lady Honoria." "Yes?" "Don't let anyone remove the tea tray from the parlor. I think it may contain the next clue." Whimsy returned to the parlor where the tea tray awaited, still positioned with careful attention near the window. The afternoon light, muted by a thin veil of mist, fell softly upon the delicate china cups and the silver teapot, whose surface gleamed dully despite the polish. The faint scent of bergamot lingered in the air, an olfactory whisper of conversation just concluded. He approached the tray deliberately, mindful not to disturb its arrangement. The teacups, one marked by a faint ring of lipstick, suggested a recent use, while the other remained pristine. Next to them sat a small plate with a few crumbs of shortbread and a folded linen napkin. Whimsy's eyes drifted to the creamer, noting the slight dribble of cream that had spilled onto the saucer, an oversight not typical of the meticulous household staff. As he bent to examine more closely, his fingers brushed against something hidden beneath the edge of the silver tray. Pulling back a small, folded scrap of paper, he unfolded it carefully. The paper was thin and aged, with a few lines of finely penned script. "Trust not the gift that comes too swift, nor the hand that seals your fate. A quiet toast may hide a rift, beware the cost of early date." Whimsy's brows furrowed as he read the cryptic note. It was clearly a warning, though to whom it was addressed remained a mystery. He refolded the paper with care and tucked it into his waistcoat pocket. Whoever had placed it there had meant for it to be found, perhaps by the Reverend or by someone else in the household. The implication was chilling. Someone anticipated harm cloaked in celebration. He stepped away from the tray and glanced around the parlor. The room was otherwise undisturbed, but the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the very air were laden with secrets. A soft cough from the doorway drew his attention. Polly, the parlor maid, stood nervously at the threshold, clutching her hands as if to steady herself. "Sir," she began hesitantly, I forgot to mention something before." "It's about the Reverend's tea." Whimsy gestured for her to continue. "Go on, Miss Polly." "Well, I thought it odd at the time. When I brought in the tray, the tea seemed colder than usual, not like it had just been poured. And there was this faint smell, not quite right, sort of metallic." "Metallic?" Whimsy echoed, intrigued. "Yes, sir. I thought maybe the water was off, or the pot wasn't rinsed properly. But the others' tea was fine, only the Reverend's." He nodded thoughtfully. "Did you tell anyone?" "No, sir. I didn't want to get in trouble for noticing something so small." "Good instinct, though. Thank you, Polly. That may prove useful." She gave a small, relieved smile and withdrew quietly. Whimsy considered this new piece of the puzzle. Cold tea, an uncharacteristic metallic odor, and a cryptic warning hidden beneath the tray, all suggestive of something deliberate and sinister. He was reminded again of the tablet he had found under the dining table earlier, a small, pale object whose nature remained unknown, but which had undoubtedly played a role in the Reverend's demise. Retracing his steps, he made his way back to the dining room, where the air still carried the faintest trace of spilt champagne and forgotten conversation. The place setting assigned to the Reverend Vale sat untouched, the glass clean and the silverware perfectly aligned, as if awaiting a diner who would never return. Whimsy crouched and examined the floor beneath the chair again. The tablet had not been the only object there. A faint scuff mark ran across the polished floorboards, as if something had been hastily moved or dropped. Standing, he allowed his gaze to drift to the windows, which were slightly open despite the chill. The breeze stirred the curtains lightly, and a stray petal from the garden's early blooms had settled on the sill. The setting felt out of place, incongruously serene in the midst of such tragedy. As he contemplated, the sound of footsteps approaching caused him to turn. Lady Honoria entered quietly, her expression guarded. "Lord Wimsey," she said softly, "I thought you might wish to speak further before you leave the dining room." "Indeed I do," Wimsey replied. "I've been pondering the note I found beneath the tea tray and the curious condition of the Reverend's tea. Tell me, Lady Honoria, who had access to the parlour this afternoon?" She considered for a moment. "Only Polly and Niven, the butler. I instructed them to prepare the tea for the Reverend and myself as a quiet reprieve before dinner. No one else was allowed near." "Did anyone visit the parlour before you or the Reverend arrived?" "No, not since the household staff finished their preparations. The servants are quite strict about their duties." "Curious, the metallic smell Polly mentioned. Could it have originated from the teapot or the water source itself?" Lady Honoria shook her head. "We have a well, but the water is tested regularly. The teapot is silver and polished daily. It seems unlikely." Wimsey nodded. "I shall examine it myself. Also, did the Reverend express any concern about the dinner or the guests prior to the meal?" "Not explicitly," she replied. He was rather quiet, but that was usual for him. He said little, only that the evening was important for the fund and that we should all behave ourselves. "And did you behave?" A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes remained wary. "As best as one can under such somber circumstances." "Thank you, Lady Honoria. Your candor is appreciated." She inclined her head and left him to his thoughts. Alone, Wimsey approached the silver teapot on the tray. His fingers traced its curved handle and the fine engraving on its surface. He lifted the lid cautiously and inhaled the faint aroma inside. Nothing unusual greeted his senses, just the lingering scent of black tea. Next, he poured a small amount onto the saucer and dipped a clean cloth into it. He held it to his tongue, an odd ritual, but one he had learned from a trusted physician. The taste was faintly metallic, confirming Polly's observation. He frowned, wondering how such contamination might have occurred. Poison? Perhaps a heavy metal compound. The possibilities multiplied quickly. At that moment, the butler, Niven, appeared quietly in the doorway, his face a mask of concern. "My lord," he said lowly, "I hope I am not interrupting. I wish to speak with you about the preparations." "Please come in, Niven. Your insight may be invaluable." The butler stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. Sir Mervyn was quite particular about the champagne and the wine. The Reverend's glass was polished separately, and the cork opened moments before the toast. None of us suspected anything. "Did you notice anyone lingering near the tray or the tea service before it was brought in?" Niven hesitated. "Now that you mention it, there was a moment when I thought I saw Miss Polly near the sideboard longer than usual, but I did not think to question it at the time." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "And the rest of the staff? Any signs of tension or disagreement?" "None overt. But the new footman, a young man named Ellis, seemed nervous tonight. He kept glancing toward the dining room window as if expecting someone." "Ellis?" Wimsey mused. "I do wonder if I might speak with him." Before Niven could reply, the door opened again, and Polly entered, cheeks flushed. "Lord Wimsey," she said quickly, "I forgot something. Ellis told me he found something behind the curtains after dinner." Wimsey's interest piqued immediately. "Something? What?" "A small vial, wrapped in paper. He was afraid it might be important, so he brought it to me. I kept it hidden until I could speak with you." Wimsey moved swiftly to the window, where Polly produced a neatly folded piece of paper. Unfolding it revealed a tiny glass vial, no larger than a finger, its contents a faintly shimmering powder. Carefully, Wimsey took the vial and held it to the light. The powder inside sparkled subtly, like crushed gems. "Where exactly was this found, Ellis?" "Behind the curtain, my lord, near the latch of the window." Whimsy glanced at the window latch. It was slightly loose, easily manipulated from the outside. "Do you think someone might have entered or left by this window?" "Possibly, my lord. It was a cold night, but the curtains were billowing as if stirred by a breeze or movement." "Good work, Ellis. This changes our understanding." He looked at Polly. "Has anyone else been near this parlor since dinner?" "No one that I know of, sir." "Very well. I shall take this vial to Dr. Solby for analysis." Polly nodded and left, and Whimsy took the vial carefully in his hand. Turning back to Niven, he said, "I must ask you again, did anyone have cause to harm the Reverend?" The butler's eyes darkened. "There were whispers, my lord. Some felt the Reverend was too rigid, too demanding. Others resented his interference in village matters, but none dared speak openly." "Yet someone had the means and opportunity," Whimsy said softly. "The question is who and why?" As he left the dining room, the puzzle pieces began to shift. The poisoned tea, the warning note, the anonymous donation, the strange vial, all threads in a web he was just beginning to unravel. His next step was clear. Speak with the footman Ellis, understand his role, and learn what secrets the shadows behind the curtains might conceal. The evening deepened outside, and Blagden House settled into uneasy silence as the spectre of betrayal lurked just beyond the glow of candlelight. Whimsy found Ellis in the servants' hall, a modest room tucked beneath the sweeping staircase of Blagden House. The footman was seated alone on a bench, fingers nervously twisting the edge of his apron. His youthful face was pale under the dim gaslight, eyes darting with a mixture of apprehension and something less easily named, perhaps guilt, perhaps fear. "Ellis," Whimsy began, his tone deliberately gentle, "thank you for bringing the vial to light. I understand this evening has been unsettling for all of you." The young man nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, my lord. I only did what seemed right. I didn't want to cause trouble." "No trouble, only truth," Whimsy replied. "Now tell me everything you observed tonight, from your arrival to the moment you found the vial." Ellis straightened, clearing his throat. "I arrived early, as usual, to help with preparations. The household was tense, Miss Polly was nervous, Niven was brisk but distant, and Sir Mervyn seemed distracted. The Reverend arrived shortly after, and the guests followed. I helped serve the drinks and cleared plates, trying to keep out of the way." "Any unusual occurrences?" "Nothing glaring, sir, but there was one thing. After dinner, when the guests had moved to the parlor for tea, I noticed a figure near the window. At first I thought it was one of the guests stepping out for air, but the figure disappeared quickly when I looked closer. I didn't see who it was." "Did you investigate further?" "No, my lord. I was ordered to remain in the hall. But afterward, while closing the curtains, I found the vial behind the drapery." "Did the vial have a label or any writing?" "No, it was just wrapped in paper, like a small package. The powder inside glimmered faintly." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "You did well to bring this forward. May I ask, have you noticed any tension among the staff? Any quarrels or odd behavior?" Ellis hesitated. "There's been talk of money troubles. Miss Polly whispered something about debts. Niven has been tight-lipped, but there's been a lot of hushed conversation when he's not around." "Money troubles often breed motives," Whimsy observed, "but they rarely tell the whole story. Thank you, Ellis. I may have further questions." With a polite nod, Whimsy left Ellis to his thoughts and made his way back upstairs, pondering the new revelation. The vial, the window, the shadowy figure, all hinted at clandestine movements and secrets far deeper than mere household gossip. He paused in the corridor outside Lady Honoria's suite and considered his next step. The lady's demeanor had been composed, yet distant, and the suggestion of monetary difficulties among the staff raised the possibility that the true drama lay beneath the polished surface of Blagden House's genteel hospitality. Whimsy entered the library, where the Reverend's desk still bore scattered papers, some stained by the unfortunate events of the evening. He examined a letter addressed to Reverend Vale, penned in an elegant hand but marked with urgency. Your obstinance endangers more than your own conscience. Cease your meddling in affairs beyond your ken, or suffer the consequences. No signature followed, but the tone was unmistakable, a thinly veiled threat. The Reverend had clearly made enemies, and the question was whether any had acted on such dark promises. As Whimsy turned the letter over, his eye caught the faint indentation of another message beneath the text, revealed by the angled light, a common technique known as second writing, used to conceal sensitive notes. With a practiced touch, Whimsy lifted a thin sheet from the blotter and examined it. The faint script read, "The donor's generosity is a poison masked as gold. Beware those who toast your name with smiles, but hold daggers in their hearts." The mystery deepened. A donor, a gift. The references were suggestive of financial matters intertwined with personal animosities. He gathered the papers and headed to the study where Sir Mervyn awaited, cigarette in hand, the smoke curling languidly toward the ceiling. "Sir Mervyn," Whimsy began, "may I have a word about the evening's affairs?" The baronet offered a wry smile. "Lord Whimsy, I feared you would want to talk. Please, do sit." Whimsy seated himself, folding the letter carefully. "It appears Reverend Vale received threats concerning his involvement with a donor. Might I inquire as to your knowledge of this donor and the Reverend's dealings?" Sir Mervyn's smile tightened. "The Reverend has always been a difficult man. His crusades to raise funds for the village hall ruffled feathers, especially among those with vested interests in the estate's affairs. Such as yourself." The baronet chuckled softly. "I prefer to think of myself as a custodian rather than an adversary. But yes, the proposed improvements would affect estate revenues and control." Whimsy studied him keenly. "And your relationship with the Reverend? Cordial, I hope." "Polite at best," Sir Mervyn admitted. "He had little regard for my counsel, and even less for the traditions I upheld. It is said that familiarity breeds contempt, but in our case, it was more like mutual annoyance. Do you know of any other individuals who might harbor ill will toward Reverend Vale?" His sister, Lady Honoria, was notably estranged. Disagreements over his inheritance and his stern moral code drove a wedge between them. Then there are the villagers themselves, some grateful, others resentful. "Thank you. One last question. Did you notice anything unusual about the champagne served during the toast?" Sir Mervyn's expression darkened. "No, it was vintage, carefully selected. The cork was popped moments before the speech. Any concerns about it?" Whimsy smiled thinly. "Only that appearances can deceive." Leaving the study, Whimsy's thoughts returned to the vial and its mysterious contents. He made his way to the laboratory quarters where Dr. Solby awaited, a stern man with a penchant for precision. "Dr. Solby," Whimsy greeted, "I trust you have examined this vial." The doctor held up a small glass container filled with the same shimmering powder. "Indeed, my lord. The substance appears to be a rare arsenic compound, one that mimics harmless dust until ingested or inhaled. A deadly toxin." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "Can it be detected in tea?" "It is tasteless, my lord, but the metallic flavor noted might come from a reaction with the tea's tannins." "Fascinating and dreadful." Dr. Solby nodded gravely. "It acts quickly, causing disorientation and ultimately cardiac arrest. A perfect weapon for subtle murder." Whimsy replaced the vial carefully in his pocket. The method of delivery was increasingly clear. The poisoned tea, the warning note, the secret threats, all were part of a calculated plan. Returning to the main hall, Whimsy found Lady Honoria waiting, her composure more strained than before. "Lord Whimsy," she said quietly, "I must confess, I feared my brother more than anyone else in the house. His wrath was formidable." "Yet he was the victim," Whimsy observed. "True," she sighed, "but his enemies were many. I have no doubt the poison was meant for him, though I cannot imagine who would dare such treachery." "Perhaps those closest to him," Wimsey suggested. Lady Honoria's eyes flickered with unease. "You speak as if the killer lurks among us." "Precisely." As the evening deepened, Wimsey's mind raced through the labyrinth of motives and means. The missing salver, the misaligned clocks, the faint echoes of footsteps unheard by the staff, all trivial details now gaining grim significance. A plan began to form, a careful threading of evidence and psychology. But the final knot remained elusive. And so the game continued, with the shadows lengthening and Blagden House holding its breath, as Lord Peter Wimsey prepared to unravel the dark tapestry woven beneath its polished surface. Wimsey's thoughts were interrupted by the soft creak of a door opening behind him. Turning, he saw Polly Stanton enter the library, her expression guarded yet weary. The household's youngest maid, she had seemed overly anxious since the tragedy, and now, perhaps sensing an ally in the detective, she sought some measure of relief in disclosure. "Lord Wimsey," she began hesitantly, "I hoped you might understand if I spoke freely. There are things the others don't say, things best not repeated in the hallways." Wimsey inclined his head, inviting her to continue. "Pray, Miss Stanton, speak as candidly as you wish. We are all bound to the truth tonight." Polly's eyes darted nervously toward the door before she lowered her voice. The Reverend's temper was known, yes, but what few knew was how deeply he was entangled in that donation. Not merely a charity, but a matter that threatened several fortunes in this village and beyond. Wimsey folded his fingers. "Go on." "He discovered that the donor's generosity came with conditions, strings that would pull the estate and its interests into an unwanted scrutiny. It seems Reverend Vale was preparing to expose those conditions, to sever the ties before they could choke the village. So the donor's generosity was a mask, hiding a potential scandal," Wimsey murmured. "Yes, my lord. And that led to many bitter arguments, between the Reverend and Lady Honoria, between him and Sir Mervyn, even between servants who feared for their positions." "Fascinating. And what of the staff? Any unusual behavior or disagreements among them?" Polly nodded slowly. "Mr. Niven, the butler, was particularly tense these days. He's a man proud of his order, but he's been whispering about debts and threats to the family. Some said he was involved in matters beyond his station." Wimsey's brow furrowed. "Involving himself in affairs dangerous enough to kill for?" "I don't know, sir," Polly said quickly. "But last week I overheard him arguing with a stranger in the servants' quarters. The stranger warned him to stay silent." "Did you catch the stranger's name?" "No, my lord, but the tone was severe, like a menace wrapped in silk." Wimsey's mind clicked into gear. The poison, the threats, the mysterious visitor, these were pieces of a growing puzzle, but the full picture remained murky. "Thank you, Polly. Your courage in speaking is commendable." As she left, Wimsey pondered the butler's potential role. Man caught between loyalty and desperation might well become a pawn or a perpetrator. That night, Wimsey requested to see the household's clock tower, a stately fixture dominating the manor's east wing. The clock had been cited by multiple witnesses as striking the hour at odd times, creating confusion during the evening's events. Niven accompanied him, his usual stoicism tempered by an uncharacteristic reluctance. "Why bring me here, my lord?" Niven asked. "Curiosity," Wimsey replied, "and a desire to test the reliability of the timeline we have constructed." The clock room was dusty and dimly lit, the pendulum swinging with a steady rhythm. Wimsey examined the mechanism carefully, noting the alignment of gears and the wear on several components. "Tell me, Mr. Niven," Wimsey began, "when was the last time this clock was serviced?" 6 months ago, sir. A routine cleaning and oiling." "Any reason the hour strike might sound at irregular intervals?" Niven hesitated. "Sometimes the mechanism sticks, or the chime hammer misses a strike. It's old, but usually reliable." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. And the bell tower? The bell is separate, sir, struck by an automated hammer controlled by the clock. Then it's possible the chime and the bell could fall out of sync. Possible, yes, my lord. Whimsy stepped back, considering. If the clocks were unreliable, then the timing of key events, the arrival of guests, the disappearance of the vial, the moment the tea was served, might all be misaligned. This introduced a significant complication in reconstructing the timeline. Later, back in the drawing room, Whimsy gathered the household once more under the pretense of a casual discussion. The room was suffused with the muted glow of oil lamps, and the shadows seemed to lengthen with the encroaching night. "My dear friends," Whimsy began, "it has come to my attention that time itself may have played tricks upon us this evening. Our trusty clock, a venerable old companion, might have been less than precise." A murmur rippled through the assembled group. Lady Honoria's eyes narrowed. Sir Mervyn's lips pressed thin. The Reverend Sister's gaze flickered with something between skepticism and concern. Whimsy continued. "This irregularity means that the sequence of events we believe certain may not be as fixed as we assumed. In other words, the hour of death, the serving of the poisoned tea, and the disappearance of the vial may not align with the apparent timeline." A hand raised, Polly Stanton's, trembling slightly. "Does this mean the murderer could have had an alibi?" "Indeed, Miss Stanton," Whimsy replied. "It opens the possibility that a carefully constructed alibi is built upon unreliable timekeeping. Therefore, our suspect might be anyone present." Sir Mervyn scoffed lightly. "Surely, Lord Whimsy, you do not suggest that everyone is guilty." "Only that we must examine the truth with fresh eyes, unclouded by assumptions," Whimsy said softly. "Now, I would like to revisit the matter of the missing salver." The group shifted uncomfortably. The silver salver, a prized heirloom, had been noted missing early in the investigation. "Why?" Whimsy inquired. "Was this salver used during the tea service? Surely it should have been accounted for after the tragic event." Niven spoke, voice steady. "The salver was placed in the pantry after tea, my lord. When the commotion arose, I assumed it remained there. Yet no one confirmed its presence after the incident." "No, my lord. I regret that now." Whimsy's gaze was piercing. The salver could be the vessel for the poison. Polly paled. "You mean the vial was placed upon it?" "Exactly. A perfect container for the powdered arsenic, easy to slip into the tea unnoticed." He paused, then added, "We must locate this salver." The household searched, retracing their steps, but the salver remained elusive. Whimsy then turned to Reverend Vale's study, where he noticed a curious detail, a book slightly out of place on the shelf. Upon closer inspection, he pulled the volume to reveal a concealed compartment behind the books, containing a small bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. The letters, addressed to the donor, detailed negotiations over the donation and hinted at escalating threats and blackmail. One letter revealed that Reverend Vale had arranged a secret meeting that evening to confront the donor or their representative. Whimsy folded the letters carefully. "The donor is no mere philanthropist, but a puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes." Returning to the hall, Whimsy shared these findings with Sir Mervyn, whose face darkened. "You see now why I oppose the Reverend's plans," he said quietly. "They threaten to expose families long thought secure." Whimsy nodded. "And yet, the truth will out, no matter how deeply buried." As midnight approached, Whimsy resolved to observe the household more closely, aware that the killer was still present, weaving lies beneath the veneer of civility. He smiled to himself, the game unfolding like a well-crafted play, each actor playing a part, each movement deliberate, until the final curtain. The night promised revelations, and Lord Peter Whimsy was ready to catch the murderer before the dawn. The house was unnervingly quiet as the first tendrils of dawn crept through the tall, mullioned windows. Whimsy moved softly through the corridors, his mind alert to every creak and shadow, every whispered breath of sound. The night's revelations had unearthed new possibilities, and though the pieces were slowly falling into place, the killer's identity still danced just beyond reach. He paused outside the servants' quarters, where faint murmurs betrayed restless sleep disturbed by unease. It was here that whimsy had sensed the deepest undercurrents, secrets shared in whispered tones, allegiances forged and broken in the shadows, away from the grand salons and drawing rooms. Inside, Polly Stanton was awake, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, hands clasped tightly. Whimsy's presence startled her only briefly before she recognized his calm demeanor. "Good morning, Miss Stanton. I trust you slept." She shook her head, eyes wide. "No, my lord. Too much to think about." "I can understand that. Your courage yesterday was invaluable. I wonder if you might help me once more." Polly nodded. "Anything, Lord Whimsy." Whimsy lowered his voice. "I need to know more about Mr. Niven. You mentioned a stranger in the servants' quarters. Can you describe this person?" Polly thought carefully. "He was tall, well-dressed, but not like the other guests. He didn't speak much, but his presence made Mr. Niven uneasy. They met near the pantry door, late in the afternoon." "Did you hear what they said?" "Only bits. Warnings to keep quiet. Threats about what would happen if secrets got out. It sounded serious." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "And Mr. Niven's demeanor, has it changed recently?" Polly hesitated. "Yes. He's been more guarded, sometimes angry. I think he's afraid." "Thank you, Polly. That is very helpful." As he left the room, Whimsy's thoughts turned once again to the missing silver salver and the poisoned tea. The presence of the mysterious visitor and the tension surrounding Niven suggested a complex web of coercion and fear. Whimsy descended to the kitchen, where Niven was busy inspecting the wine cellar. The butler's face was impassive, but Whimsy detected the tautness beneath the surface. "Mr. Niven," Whimsy began, "I am grateful for your cooperation thus far. There is one matter that requires clarity, the whereabouts of the silver salver after the tea service." Niven's eyes flickered with hesitation. "It was placed in the pantry, my lord, as I said. I ensured it was out of the way. Yet it cannot be found." "No, sir. Have you any idea who might have taken it or why?" Niven's gaze dropped. "No, my lord." Whimsy's instincts told him the butler was withholding something, but he pressed gently. "Mr. Niven, I assure you, withholding information only complicates matters. We must uncover the truth for the sake of all present." The butler's jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "Very well, my lord. There is something I ought to say. I have been in correspondence with certain parties, friends of the estate, who expressed concerns about the Reverend's actions." Whimsy leaned forward. "And what did these concerns entail?" "They feared the exposure of financial irregularities and threats to the estate's reputation. Some suggested that more drastic measures might be necessary to prevent scandal." Whimsy's eyes narrowed. "Drastic measures? Are you suggesting that these fears might have prompted violence?" Niven swallowed. "I do not know, my lord, but I confess I have been under pressure." "Pressure from whom?" "From the stranger you mentioned. He delivered messages, warnings, and threats. I was told to keep silent or face consequences." Whimsy's mind raced. The stranger, the threats, the missing salver, the poisoned tea, all threads converging toward a sinister design. "Tell me, Mr. Niven, can you describe this stranger?" "A man of refined manners, but cold and unyielding. He never gave his name." "Have you seen him since?" "Only once, earlier this evening, speaking briefly with Lady Honoria." Whimsy's pulse quickened. Lady Honoria had been distant but present, and her interactions with the stranger might be pivotal. "Thank you, Mr. Niven. Your honesty is appreciated." Leaving the cellar, Whimsy made his way toward Lady Honoria's suite, determined to confront her about this visitor. The door was ajar, and the lady herself stood by the window looking out at the misty grounds with an inscrutable expression. "My lady," Wimsey said gently, "may I speak with you?" She turned, her composure slipping momentarily. "Of course, Lord Wimsey. What is it?" "I understand a visitor came to see you this evening, a man unknown to the household, but bearing influence and threats." Her eyes darkened. "Yes, I feared that some truths would surface tonight, truths I wished to keep hidden. This man arrived to warn me, to advise caution." "Caution against what?" "Against the Reverend's zeal. He was a danger to many, including myself. The donor's secrets, the debts owed, the threats to the estate. It was a fragile web." "Did you share any knowledge of the poison or the missing salver with this man?" "No. But I feared the consequences of the Reverend's plans so much, I considered preventing his speech tonight." Wimsey's gaze was steady. "You considered murder, my lady?" Her eyes widened in shock. "No, I only meant to stop him by any means necessary, to protect what remained of our family's honor." Wimsey saw the weight of her confession, the burden of secrecy that threatened to unravel everything. As he left, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the grand hall, casting long shadows across the floor. The house, steeped in history and secrets, was no longer merely a setting for tragedy. It was the crucible where truth and deception would collide. Wimsey gathered the household once more, his voice calm but resolute. "The time has come to reveal what we have uncovered. Sir, the web of deceit is vast, but not beyond untangling." He turned toward Niven, who stood pale and tense. "Mr. Niven, the stranger who pressured you, was he alone?" "Yes, my lord, but his influence is far-reaching. And, Lady Honoria, your admission adds a vital piece. The threats, the poison, the missing salver, these are all linked." The room was silent, the weight of accusation hanging heavy. Wimsey's gaze swept the assembly. "One among you sought to silence Reverend Vale permanently. The question is not if, but who." He paused, letting the tension mount. "Now consider this. The salver, the vessel for the poison, was not merely misplaced but hidden. By whom and why?" Polly Stanton stepped forward hesitantly. I found it, my lord, hidden behind the wine racks in the cellar." Wimsey's eyes brightened. "Excellent. That discovery confirms the plan's sophistication." He lifted the salver carefully. "Who had access to the cellar at the critical moments?" Several eyes met in uneasy glances. Wimsey's voice grew firm. "Mr. Niven, your role in this is undeniable. The threats you endured and your actions placed you in the heart of the conspiracy. But it is not you alone." Turning to Sir Mervyn, he added, "You opposed the Reverend vehemently and had much to lose." "And Lady Honoria's secret visitor," Wimsey continued, "the man who wielded shadows and whispered threats." The house seemed to hold its breath. Wimsey's voice dropped to a final whisper. "The truth is close now. The murderer walks among us." A sharp sound, the crack of a door slamming shut, startled the gathering. Wimsey's eyes fixed on the corridor beyond, where a figure vanished into the morning mist. With a swift nod, he signaled to the butler, and the chase began, the long night of secrets giving way to the dawn of justice. The figure's silhouette slipped swiftly into the swirling morning mist beyond the manor's grand front doors, the echo of hurried footsteps fading into the damp air. Wimsey, already moving with purposeful strides, signaled to a couple of the household staff to follow quietly, their faces taut with alarm and determination. The chase was on, but the fog was thick and the grounds expansive, lending the fugitive a fleeting advantage. Wimsey's mind, however, remained razor-sharp despite the uncertainty of the pursuit. Every detail of the previous hours was sharpened in his memory. The furtive meetings, the concealed letters, the missing salver discovered behind the wine racks, and now the sudden flight of someone clearly desperate to escape scrutiny. It was clear that the net was tightening, but the question remained. Who was this figure, and what would they reveal once caught? The servants' hurried footsteps behind him grew louder as they pressed forward through the wet grass, but the morning's chill was beginning to seep into Whimsy's bones, reminding him that time was of the essence. The manor's grounds stretched beyond the immediate gardens into wild patches of woods and tangled undergrowth, places a desperate person could easily disappear. Yet Whimsy knew these grounds intimately, and he was confident the culprit would be cornered soon. Suddenly, as they rounded the edge of the old stone wall that bordered the property, a sharp cry cut through the silence, a voice both startled and pained. Whimsy halted, listening intently. The chase had forced the unknown figure into a trap of their own making, the ancient, crumbling greenhouse perched precariously at the edge of the woods, its glass panes shattered and covered in ivy. Whimsy approached cautiously, motioning the others to keep their distance. The air inside the greenhouse was thick with humidity and the scent of decay, a fitting place for secrets to wither and die. Among the broken pots and tangled vines, the figure crouched, breathing heavily, caught between flight and fight. "Do not move," Whimsy called out calmly, his voice steady and commanding. The figure's eyes met his, wild with fear and defiance. Slowly, the man or woman stood, wiping dirt from trembling hands. It was Mr. Niven, the butler. The stoic mask had shattered, revealing a man driven to desperation. Whimsy's gaze softened just slightly. "Mr. Niven, you have much to explain. Why flee when the truth is all that is sought here?" Niven's voice was ragged. "Because the truth will ruin me, and others. I did what I had to do to protect this house, to keep the secrets buried." "But at what cost?" Whimsy asked quietly. "A man has died, poisoned in this very home." Niven looked away, shame flooding his features. It was not meant to happen, only to frighten the Reverend into silence. But fear is a cruel master. Whimsy stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Tell me everything, Mr. Niven. Every word, every action." And so, beneath the shattered glass and tangled ivy, the butler began to unravel his tale. It was not merely threats from an unseen stranger that had gripped him in a vice of fear. It was a conspiracy woven through the very fabric of the estate. Financial improprieties, blackmail, and years of silent complicity had bound several prominent figures, including Lady Honoria and Sir Mervyn, into a pact of mutual protection. Reverend Vale, with his zeal and integrity, had threatened to unravel this fragile alliance with his plans to expose the hidden debts and coercion tied to the mysterious donor. Niven admitted to acting as an intermediary, delivering veiled warnings to the Reverend, and later attempting to sabotage the tea service by swapping vessels to delay the meeting, hoping to prevent a confrontation. But when it became clear the Reverend was undeterred, desperation had led to a fatal misstep. The poisoned tea, intended only as a scare, became a weapon of death. As the confession unfolded, Whimsy's mind pieced together the timeline with a newfound clarity. The missing salver, the conflicting clock strikes, the clandestine meetings, they all pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan to protect the estate's legacy at any cost. When Niven finished, Whimsy's eyes met his steadily. "You acted out of fear, loyalty, and desperation. Yet in doing so, you condemned a man of principle." Niven bowed his head. "I accept whatever judgment is passed, Lord Whimsy." With Niven's confession secured, Whimsy arranged for his immediate detention and summoned the household to the great hall once more. The tension there was palpable, the long night's uncertainty replaced by a sobering calm. Whimsy addressed them all, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "The mystery has been solved by Mr. Niven's own admission. The Reverend's death was a tragic consequence of fear and conspiracy, but justice must be served." Lady Honoria and Sir Mervyn exchanged glances, their composure faltering under the unyielding gaze of truth. Their involvement in the tangled web of deceit was undeniable, though the full extent of their complicity would require further inquiry. Polly Stanton, standing quietly near the back, exhaled deeply, relief softening her features. The house could finally begin to breathe again, freed from the shadows that had gripped it so tightly. As daylight fully claimed the manor, Whimsy allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The case had been one of the most intricate he had encountered, a tragedy born not only of murder, but of pride, fear, and the desperate desire to preserve appearances. Yet beneath it all, the indomitable truth had prevailed, illuminating the darkness with the steady light of reason. Whimsy knew that in this old house, with its echoes of history and hidden sin, peace would not come easily. But for now, justice had been served, and the game was finally over. The weight of Niven's confession still lingered in the air as the household settled uneasily into a tense quiet. Though the immediate danger seemed past, Whimsy knew the true unraveling was only just beginning. The confession had confirmed the fatal act, but it had also illuminated a tangled network of motives and concealed truths that demanded further scrutiny. Whimsy retreated briefly to his chambers, seeking clarity amid the swirling questions. The estate, with all its grandeur and hidden corners, had proven to be a crucible of human frailty. Pride, fear, and desperation intertwining in lethal fashion. Yet there were still threads that pulled at his attention. Lady Honoria's role, the mysterious visitor, Sir Mervyn's veiled hostility, and the donor's shadow looming over the estate, all pointed to a deeper complexity. He resolved to return once more to the library, where the late Reverend had spent so much time preparing his speech. Perhaps among the scattered papers and notes there lay something overlooked, a clue to the heart of the conflict that had ignited the tragedy. The library's heavy scent of leather and dust greeted him as he entered, the morning light casting long beams across the worn desk strewn with parchments. Among the documents, Whimsy's eyes caught a small folded letter tucked beneath a book. Its seal was broken, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Reverend Vale's own hand. He unfolded the letter carefully, reading the dense script that revealed the Reverend's fears and suspicions. It spoke of hidden debts tied to the donor, of whispered threats against those who might expose the truth, and of an urgent plea to the local magistrate for intervention. Most striking was the mention of a coded ledger, a document said to record the estate's illicit financial dealings, a ledger that, if found, would unravel the conspiracy entirely. This ledger was the missing piece. Whoever had orchestrated the poisoning had not only sought to silence the Reverend, but also to ensure the ledger never surfaced. Whimsy's mind raced with questions. Where was this ledger now? Who had access to it? And how deeply entrenched was the corruption? Determined to pursue this lead, Whimsy sought out Polly Stanton, whose keen eyes and proximity to the household's secrets had already proven invaluable. When he shared the letter's contents, her expression tightened. "I've heard whispers among the servants, my lord," she said quietly. There was talk of a hidden compartment in the study where valuables and papers were kept, something that none but the closest confidants knew about. Whimsy nodded. "Then we must search there immediately." They moved swiftly to the study, a smaller, more private room off the main hall. Its walls were lined with bookcases, and a large desk sat beneath the window. Whimsy began his inspection with practiced care, examining the bindings of the books and the woodwork for any sign of concealment. His fingers traced the edge of a particular shelf, where a faint irregularity caught his attention. Pressing gently, a panel slid inward, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside lay a worn, leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age but filled with neat, meticulous entries. Whimsy opened the ledger, scanning the columns of figures and names, the coded shorthand that only someone intimately familiar with the estate's finances could decipher. Here were the evidence and the motive laid bare. Loans disguised as donations, payments to shadowy individuals, and, most damningly, notes on threats made to keep certain truths from emerging. Before Whimsy could delve deeper, a sudden noise startled them, a floorboard creaking behind the heavy curtains. Polly stepped back, eyes wide, and Whimsy reached slowly for his pocket watch, his senses alert. "Someone else knows what we have found," Whimsy murmured. "We must act cautiously." They concealed the ledger beneath Whimsy's coat and left the study quietly. The house, once again, felt charged with hidden eyes and silent watchers. The danger, far from over, had tightened its grip. Whimsy convened a discreet meeting with Lady Honoria and Sir Mervyn in the drawing-room, presenting the ledger as incontrovertible evidence of financial wrongdoing and coercion. Their faces betrayed a flicker of panic, yet they maintained a veneer of composure. "You see, Lady Honoria," Whimsy said gently but firmly, "the Reverend's warnings were not unfounded. This ledger documents a conspiracy that threatens not just the estate's reputation, but the very lives of those involved." Lady Honoria's voice was strained but resolute. "What would you have us do, Lord Whimsy? This scandal could ruin us all." "Truth must prevail," he replied. "Only by confessing and cooperating can you hope for leniency. Attempting to bury these facts will only deepen the wounds." Sir Mervyn shifted uneasily. "And what of the donor, this shadowy figure you speak of? How far does their influence reach?" "Farther than you or I might like to admit," Whimsy said quietly. "But the ledger and the Reverend's courage have pierced the veil. It is time to face the consequences." As the conversation unfolded, the atmosphere grew heavier, but a fragile sense of hope emerged. The walls of deception, long built to protect pride and secrecy, were beginning to crumble. That evening, as the household prepared for the magistrate's arrival, Whimsy took a moment to stand by the great window overlooking the estate's gardens, now bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The path to justice would be long and arduous, but the first crucial steps had been taken. In the stillness, he reflected on the human cost. A man's life lost, the betrayal of trust, and the courage required to confront uncomfortable truths. The case had revealed not only a murder, but the deeper rot beneath the surface of respectability. Yet Whimsy remained confident that reason and integrity would ultimately triumph, for even in the darkest houses, light could find a way to shine through. Tomorrow would bring reckonings, confessions, and perhaps redemption. But for now, the game was far from over, and Lord Peter Whimsy was ready for whatever lay ahead. The morning sun filtered weakly through heavy clouds as the manor's grand doors opened to admit the local magistrate, a stern man with keen eyes and little patience for theatrics. The household gathered in the drawing-room, the air taut with anticipation and the residue of sleepless nights. Whimsy stood near the hearth, his posture relaxed but alert, the ledger securely in hand, the weight of truth pressing upon all present. Lady Honoria and Sir Mervyn sat stiffly, their composure fraying beneath the magistrate's scrutinizing gaze. Polly Stanton lingered nearby, a quiet pillar of steadiness amid the tension. The butler, Mr. Niven, sat apart, his guilt a visible shackle, yet his demeanor bore the dignity of one resigned to fate. Whimsy began, his voice measured and deliberate, as he recounted the sequence of discoveries and revelations that had led to this gathering. The poisoned tea, the fateful confession, the hidden ledger, each detail woven carefully into the fabric of the narrative, leaving no room for doubt or distraction. "The tragedy here," Whimsy intoned, "is not merely one of murder, but of human weakness cloaked in loyalty and fear. Mr. Niven's act, though condemnable, was born of a desperate desire to shield this estate and its inhabitants from ruin." The magistrate nodded gravely. "Yet the law demands accountability, Lord Whimsy. Justice must be served, regardless of motive." Whimsy inclined his head in solemn agreement. "Of course. It is the delicate balance between justice and mercy that we now must consider. Turning to Lady Honoria and Sir Mervyn, Wimsey addressed the deeper stain uncovered by the ledger. Your complicity in this conspiracy, though perhaps less direct, implicates you in a web of deceit and coercion that has festered for years. The Reverend's courage to expose this has cost him dearly. Lady Honoria's voice was brittle but defiant. We acted to protect what little remained of our family's legacy. The donor's demands grew more insistent, more threatening. We had no choice. Sir Mervyn's features twisted with frustration. And the Reverend would have destroyed us all with his revelations. Wimsey's gaze sharpened. Choices made under duress do not absolve one of responsibility. The ledger reveals a pattern of threats and payments meant to silence truth. That is the heart of the matter. The magistrate spoke, breaking the heavy silence. This house will face inquiry and reparation. But for now, the focus is the death of Reverend Vale. He looked to Niven, who met the gaze steadily. Mr. Niven, you admit to the poisoning. Do you understand the gravity of your confession? Niven's voice was low but clear. I do, sir. I acted out of fear and misplaced loyalty. I am prepared to accept the consequences. Wimsey allowed a brief, satisfied nod before turning back to the assembly. There is, however, one final piece to consider. He gestured toward the study where the ledger had been found. The ledger, while damning, was but one part of a larger scheme. The missing window latch, the misaligned clocks, the movements of various household members, all contributed to an illusion crafted to misdirect and delay justice. Polly stepped forward. And the mysterious visitor, the one none could place, was an accomplice, attempting to retrieve or destroy evidence. Their sudden disappearance only deepened the confusion. Wimsey nodded. Indeed, the game was intricate, but not flawless. It was a theater of deception, relying on fear and loyalty twisted beyond recognition. As the magistrate prepared to formalize the charges, Wimsey allowed himself a moment's reflection. The case had tested his faculties and his patience, but it had also reaffirmed his belief in the power of reason and human complexity. Before departing, Wimsey turned to Polly, his tone lighter yet no less earnest. Your insight has been invaluable, Miss Stanton. You have the keen eye of a true observer. Polly smiled faintly. Thank you, Lord Wimsey. I only wish to see justice done. As the manor quieted, the shadows of guilt and sorrow lingering in its corners, Wimsey prepared to take his leave. He paused at the threshold, casting a final glance over the estate's grounds, where the first tentative rays of sun pierced the grey. Justice, like dawn, he mused softly, may be slow to break, but its light is steadfast and true. With that, Lord Peter Wimsey vanished into the mist, leaving behind a house forever altered. Its secrets laid bare, its sins acknowledged, and its future uncertain but unshackled from the past. The gathering had thinned to a hush, save for the gentle ticking of the restored clocks whose precise chimes now marked time rather than confusion. Lord Peter Wimsey stood by the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping the room with that characteristic mixture of amusement and gravitas. The moment had arrived, the unveiling of the final truth concealed beneath layers of deception and fear. My dear friends, he began, voice smooth and unhurried, we have examined every shadow, every alibi, every misplaced glance. Yet as in all puzzles of human nature, it is not the obvious motive alone that reveals the culprit, but the subtler intricacies of behavior, the nervous tic, the inconsistency in timing, and the quietest whisper of a secret too long held. He stepped forward, nodding toward the ledger resting solemnly on the desk. This ledger was no mere record of financial transactions. It was the fulcrum upon which reputations teetered and fortunes fell. Its existence provoked fear, yet its concealment was bungled by the one who believed loyalty would protect them. Whimsy's eyes locked on Mr. Niven, the butler, whose resignation bore the weight of guilt. Your decision to poison Reverend Vale, though fatal, was a desperate attempt to silence a threat you felt powerless to oppose. But the tragedy lies not only in the act itself, but in the chain of manipulation that led to it. Turning to Lady Honoria and Sir Mervyn, Whimsy's tone sharpened. Your complicity in maintaining the facade, pressing your servants into silence, and the orchestration of timepieces to mislead investigation all point to a fear of ruin rather than malice. He paused to let this sink in. Yet the final deception was the missing window latch and the mysterious visitor, the Reverend's nephew, whose attempt to seize the ledger's secrets exposed the fragile web of lies. Polly Stanton stepped forward, her calm eyes steady. He was the spark that set this powder keg aflame, though none had foreseen it. Whimsy nodded. Indeed, the interplay of fear, loyalty, and avarice brought about this fatal culmination. He drew a slow breath. Justice, then, is not solely the execution of punishment, but the illumination of truth, however uncomfortable it may be. With a faint smile, he added, and as the bard reminds us, truth will come to light. Murder cannot be hid long. It is now revealed, and with it, the hope that this house may find peace. The room was silent save for the resolute ticking of the clocks now set to the true hour. Whimsy gave a slight bow, his work concluded. I shall take my leave, confident that reason and clarity have prevailed, even amid human folly. With that, Lord Peter Whimsy departed into the gathering dusk, leaving behind a household forever marked by revelations and, perhaps, the faintest promise of redemption.